Back in the 1970s, my dad took an economics course when he was an undergrad. He likes to say the only thing that he remembers is that MR equals MC. That's literally it. Part of that is just because he slept through all of class. But part of it was that his professor gave him the if you only take one thing away from this class line. But it is important. So I want you to take this away from this class too. So, especially in higher level econ courses, we often leave this rule and this idea explicit. So remember that marginal means the next unit. So marginal revenue is the additional revenue from the firm that the firm earns from selling one more unit of the product. Marginal cost is the other side of the equation, the additional cost the firm incurs from producing one more unit of the product. So if a firm is maximizing their profit, they'll produce up until the point where the marginal revenue equals the marginal cost. Now, if they stop producing before that, when the marginal revenue is greater than the marginal cost, they're leaving money on the table. At that time, they can produce an additional unit and increase their profit. So if they do make that mistake, which firms can do, we can all be wrong and still be rational in an economic sense. If they do make that mistake in the short term, they won't make it over the long term. Soon enough, they'll realize they're leaving money on the table and jump on the opportunity, increase their production, whether it's by one unit or more units, and do that until the marginal revenue equals the marginal cost. So as long as they can continue to earn more profit from producing additional units. But over the long run, they will want to stop when marginal revenue equals the marginal cost. If the marginal revenue is less than the marginal cost, that means they're making less money for that last unit than they spent to produce it. That means they're losing money on each unit they produce beyond that. Again, they may do that in one period. They may do it even longer because they're wrong, do it by mistake. But once they realize that they're losing money producing that last unit, they'll stop. Now, just like a firm maximizes profits by producing up to the point where marginal revenue equals the marginal cost, a firm also maximizes their profits when hiring workers by applying a similar rule. So think of their decision to hire labor, their labor demand curve, in the same way you think about their production decisions. Firms aim to optimize their choices by comparing marginal benefits to marginal costs. They want to hire workers until the value of their marginal product equals the added cost of hiring that worker. When the value of what an additional worker produces, so their VMPL, when we showed before on the figures, is greater than the wage they're paid, the firm can increase profit by hiring more workers. But if the cost of hiring an additional worker, the wage that they're paying to that worker, is greater than the value that that worker adds to the firm should hire fewer workers and they should not hire that worker. So profit maximization occurs where the value of the marginal product of labor equals the wage, which is basically another way to say that marginal cost equals marginal revenue. So both of the firm's decisions, the output level and how many workers to hire, follow the same profit maximizing logic, the same basic idea. In the production decision, the firm's comparing marginal revenue to marginal cost. In the hiring decision, the firm's comparing the value of what a worker produces to the wage they're being paid. In both cases, the firm stops with increasing production or stops hiring workers when the marginal benefit equals the marginal cost. So if we go back to that bakery example that I used, in the production decision, the bakery decides how many cookies to bake by comparing their revenue from selling one more cookie, the marginal revenue, to the cost of baking that additional cookie, the marginal cost. So they may be wrong in the short term, but in the long term, they're going to bake cookies up until the point where the marginal revenue of that last cookie equals the marginal cost of that last cookie. And that's where they maximize their profits. Now, at the same time, when it comes to hiring workers, that bakery faces the same sort of decision. So how many bakers do we hire? Just like how many cookies to actually bake. Now, each baker contributes to producing more cookies, and the value of their contribution, the VMPL, depends on how many additional cookies they can produce and at what price those cookies sell for. The bakery will keep hiring bakers as long as the value of what they produce is greater than the wage that they have to pay to those bakers. So they'll stop hiring when the VMPL equals the wage, or the marginal revenue from that worker equals the marginal cost of that worker. So for example, the value of the cookies that a baker produces in an hour is $25, and they only need to pay that baker $20 an hour, they'll hire more bakers. At that point, the bakers are producing more in value than it costs them, the marginal revenue greater than the marginal cost. But if the value of those cookies drops to $20, they'll stop there. That because that will maximize their profit, the $20 in revenue and the $20 in the wage cost. And if the value drops any below that, over the long term, they'll fire the marginal baker, the last baker, to bring down the marginal cost so that it's equal to the marginal rent. Now, something that's common in economics is people saying, sure, your theory is great, but people really don't take this stuff into account. They don't even know the things your model says they need to know. And when they make decisions, they're thinking of other things. And this may be true sometimes. People definitely don't consciously think through all of these ideas. They don't calculate cost curves and things like that. But what's really interesting about these theories is that people behave as if they do take these things into account. So for economists, it's great because we don't need to know what's going on in people's heads. All we have to do is see that their actions map onto these theories, and it does so really well. So even though firms might not sit down and calculate the marginal productivity of each worker, their actions still align with the principles of marginal productivity theory that we've outlined. So the key idea here is that firms are always trying to be as efficient as possible to maximize profits and to stay in business. The goal sort of being the broad goal being to maximize profits, to keep going, and then to do that, trying to be efficient, trying to lower costs. So the owner might not calculate exactly how much each pizza delivery boy, how much value they add, how much the counter staff adds to the shop's revenue. But they can see if the shop is getting busy and if customers are waiting too long, hiring another worker might speed things up, bring in more customers. They see that there is real value there from hiring an additional worker. But on the other hand, if the shop's slow, they're not selling enough pizza, hiring more staff would just increase their costs without increasing the revenue. So the owner makes decisions based on these practical observations, which are in line with the principles of marginal productivity theory, even if they're not consciously doing that step by step. So employers make decisions that reflect how valuable each worker is to the firm. And it's much easier to imagine this and to think through this in the small examples like a pizza shop or a bakery where you might have 5 workers rather than a giant firm like IBM or something like that. But in general, firms and their managers make decisions based on their current structure and from there decide to expand or contract. So they're set up to think like they're using marginal analysis. So for example, if hiring an additional worker helps the company produce more goods and earns more revenue than the cost of that worker's wage, the employer will hire them. If not, they won't. This is the basic logic of marginal productivity theory. And in real life, firms act as if they understand marginal productivity because failing to do so ends up hurting them in the long run.